My next guest is Rebecca Potts Aguirre. She is a teaching artist currently living in Los Angeles. Her work is inspired by the intersection between ecological concern and the female experience, especially that of motherhood and trauma, often used often using unconventional materials that connect to childhood and women's work. She is represented by Stay Home Gallery for 2021. She is also a member of the Spilt Milk Gallery and is listed in the curated directories All She Makes and Visionary Art Collective. Rebecca earned her MFA in Visual Arts from Washington University in St. Louis and her BA in Studio Art and Geography from Middlebury College. Her work has been exhibited throughout the US and in Europe and Australia at spaces including the Mildred Lane Kemper Art Museum, Zhou B Art Center, New York Studio Gallery, Share L.A, and SoLA Contemporary. Welcome to the podcast, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Yes, so good to be here.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Yeah, I feel like I went the opposite way a lot of your guests go. I started my career more administratively within education, and at the very beginning was not working within the arts, but was continuing to make art. As you read my bio, I'm a visual artist. But I began my career doing AmeriCorps for 1 year, community organizing around environmental issues, and then shifted to helping start a small school back in the early 2000s in Brooklyn when New York had a big small schools movement. So lots of brand new public schools were being created that were intended to give more sort of personalized attention to students. And most of the schools had really narrow sort of themes, almost more like magnet schools. So I helped start a school that was focused around business and community development. So again, not art related, but was helping bring in programming for the school, including the arts, and continuing to make my own art sort of in the downtime, whatever time that was. And it felt really meaningful in a lot of ways, but I also there was something missing. There was something lacking. And I think that was two things. It was more art and also more like direct interaction with the students, because I was more administrative. I wasn't teaching. So shifting into teaching and focusing on art. So teaching art, I feel like was my sort of climbing out of the trenches moment.
And so currently you're in LA, but you also took a time period. You talked to me in the pre-chat about living in Prague and kind of that experience and maybe just observing Prague from an artist lens. And then once you had your daughter, kind of how did that transition go to doing what you're doing now, being a working artist?
Yeah, that was a difficult transition. My husband and I decided to kind of throw darts at the map of Europe and in the way of throwing job applications out there and see what stuck. We had been in New York for a long time and we're kind of ready for a change. So we landed in Prague and I broke my foot right before moving, then pretty immediately got pregnant and had a really difficult pregnancy in Prague. So I feel like I didn't get much of experiencing such a beautiful city without sort of medical issues impeding that experience. But shifting. So my daughter was born there. I was home with her. I briefly taught private art lessons in Prague and had to, stop because I had HG. So I had a really hard pregnancy where I was sort of bedridden a lot of the time. And then as a brand new mom, also decided not to go straight back into work, took some time, and the maternity policies there are just completely different. Like there was absolutely no expectation that I would be working before she turned 2. So I got to do that. I got to be home with her until she was about 2. And at that point, we were kind of missing family and moved back to the US, ended up here in LA. And I did feel like she had gotten big enough that she was becoming slightly more, independent of me. She wasn't like constantly attached to my body, which she was really for the first year, at least. And I was again kind of feeling that missing something, lack of my own creative pursuits, my own sort of career. So slowly kind of eased my way back into teaching art. And then that helped me actually ease my way back into making art. So I feel like it was both my daughter and my students that really helped me out of kind of a funk of early motherhood. I really didn't create art for those first couple years, but getting back to teaching and then also just playing with her and making art with her helped me come back to that.
So tell me a little bit about your current position. So you are a working artist, and we'll talk a little bit about the artist piece, but so you had been teaching in 2 different elementary schools pre-COVID, and then you said during when most of the schools were remote, you were making lessons for the various elementary schools there through an organization, and now shortly we're going to start back up working at those 2 elementary schools. So what is that experience like? Just kind of going back into the classroom and working with these youngsters and just teaching art to elementary schools, because you've taught art at all levels, correct?
Yeah. So in New York, I was mostly administrative. I had several roles there. I started out, like I said, in that sort of small school, not completely art related, but then went back to school, got an MFA, and returned to working for nonprofits in New York, managing art education programs, where I managed K through 12 programs. And then I also was teaching maybe 1 day a week. And that ranged from, I had a few elementary programs, a few middle school, a few high school. So kind of all different levels. And in grad school, of course, I was a teaching assistant. So I taught at the university level then. But yeah, the last, I guess, 4 years here in Los Angeles, I've been teaching at the elementary level at those 2 schools. And when the pandemic started, I had been that year at both schools. One school I was on a cart, and one school I had my classroom. And then the pandemic shut everything down. So I continued, like I finished out that school year with both schools, basically making video lessons that I sent off to the classroom teachers. And I got some feedback via email, but it was a very strange way of teaching without the like immediate feedback. Because I feel like most teachers are always adjusting kind of on the fly. You can see what's landing, where are students getting stuck? Where do you need to kind of slow down? Or where are they like, I got it, move along. So just not having any of that feedback was difficult. And then also not being able to see really what the students were creating and what they were like. Art is such a physical subject. They're using their hands, they're cutting and drawing and painting and doing these physical things that in the classroom I can see who's maybe a little bit stuck or who's not quite holding their brush properly, and I can go help with those issues. But when I'm sending off a video and then I may or may not get a response, it was just a completely different way of teaching. Kind of cross your fingers and send it off.
Yeah.
And that's basically the way I've been teaching this entire last school year. My schools, because of COVID, cut their art budgets. So I was luckily still employed by the nonprofit that I work with that sends me into the schools, but was making videos that were then sent to lots of schools around Los Angeles. And now I am gearing up to go back into the schools next week. I'm definitely a little bit nervous just going back. Everyone is fully masked. We're not completely distanced anymore, but Masks are required for all staff and students. Vaccines are required for all staff, and I'm, fully vaccinated already. But those things make me a little less nervous in terms of just the pandemic and continued concerns with, my daughter's too young to get vaccinated. So that worries me, but she's there. She's already started school at one of the schools I teach at, and she's been doing well so far. I guess my other concern going back is that I'm now going to be on a cart at both schools, which means I've got my little cart of art supplies and I go from classroom to classroom. So that's also just a tricky way to try to teach.
Yeah. In the Denver area where I am, they do have a specific art room. So I imagine when you're on a cart, the kids then keep their art projects in the regular classroom, and like if there's things that need to dry, is there then a drying rack that the teachers are keeping? Maybe.
Good question. When I know at one school, because I had already been on a cart at one of these schools, so I kind of have the lay of the land there, and I had a few drying racks that I would take with me to, like, I would have my cart and then I'd be also pulling along this drying rack. But I also communicate with the teachers and know some of them do have their own drying racks, so we can use that. It really varies classroom to classroom what they have and what they're kind of set up for, how they've arranged their space. But now I've been at these schools for a little while, so I know all of the teachers and just reach out to them. Like, I'll be sending an email probably later today, tomorrow, about the program, and these are the things that I need you to have in your classroom because I don't have a classroom. And they've all been super helpful, so that's a good thing. That's definitely a positive, going back to a staff that's like, we're all on the same team.
Yeah, and it must be exciting to not have to just send out videos to the void.
Yeah,
you're seeing what the kids are doing now again.
Yeah, so much more inspiring.
So tell me a little bit about the perspective of being a parent of an elementary school age student and also teaching this age group of students.
Yeah, before becoming a parent, I really gravitated towards older students. I preferred high school and even university, and kind of struggled a bit with managing elementary classrooms. But I feel like having my own child really helped with kind of understanding where the younger ones are coming from. And she's been an amazing guinea pig for my lessons, especially this last year and a half of making videos and sending them out into the void. I'll at least have one sort of captive subject that I can see how she responds and like how long things take her. Yeah.
Good. So let's talk a little bit about some of your materials that you use. And I know you have some of those available to show for the listeners who are watching on YouTube. So you have some training as a printmaker. So I'm just somebody who's a parent of students who are pretty good in art, but I was never much of an artist. I took art through 8th grade, but so I'm not really familiar about what a printmaker is. And if you can explain that and how you use that in your teaching.
Yeah, so the way I explain printmaking to students is that it's basically stamping. So you're creating a stamp, and in printmaking, we call that your plate, your printing plate. And there's lots of different ways you can create that. It could be, a metal plate that you etch with acids, which obviously we're not doing in the elementary classroom, to a cardboard plate you build up by gluing things down, to something like this. And I'll show you my linoleum. So this is carved out of linoleum. And I've done both sides. Usually you just do one, but this results in, this is a 2-plate print, so 2 colors, and results in this. So I'm showing right now, for people who don't see the video, I'm showing a butterfly print that I carved, sort of a larger butterfly shape that will be printed orange on one
Mhm.
side, and then I carved lots of details of that would go into the wings out of one side that gets printed in black.
Okay.
So the orange gets printed and then the black gets printed.
And if you were to do an activity like this with, let's say, maybe upper elementary school students,
Mhm.
would this be like a week-long process? How long till they have the final result if you were to see them every day?
Yeah, I right now I see them once a week, but seeing students every day, so thinking like 5 lessons. Yeah, usually I have a very short time with them, so a lot of my lessons are really condensed. When I do printmaking, I haven't used linoleum because of the carving tools. It takes a little bit longer, and I wouldn't really do it with anybody under 5th grade, just because that can be a little bit dangerous. You're cutting into this linoleum. But I do printmaking with cardboard usually, where we're starting with one piece of cardboard and then you can cut out shapes. And sort of the same way I have the shape of the butterfly here, I could cut out like a layer of cardboard to make that stand up a little bit, so that when I put paint on it or ink on it, it stands out and it becomes like a stamp. So that would be at least 2 sessions, one to create the plate and let it dry, glue it, have it ready, and then the second to put ink or paint on it and then print it.
So those lessons that you have with the students, how long are they usually?
Usually I have 50 minutes with 1st grade through 5th grade and 30 minutes with kindergarten, TK and kinder, and once a week. So not super often. And I actually, because I'm at 2 schools, I rotate between the grades. So I only see students for 10 weeks of the year. So I'll have certain grade for 10 weeks and then shift to a different grade for 10 weeks.
So you eventually get to know all the students.
So I eventually get to see them all. Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the materials of childhood and motherhood, like Play-Doh and polymer clay, and how you incorporate those into your teaching.
Yeah, so those, I don't as much incorporate them into teaching, although I have used some Play-Doh in my teaching, especially with the younger kids. They just love it. And it's an easy clay that they're familiar with to work with. So with students, I usually gravitate towards sort of really simple, more abstract sculpture projects where there's not really a wrong way to do it. And the whole goal is to just get them like working with their hands, being tactile with clay, and starting to become familiar with the material. With my own work, I'm making what I'm calling clay paintings. So I'm using Play-Doh and also polymer clay to create more 2-dimensional works. I've never thought of myself much as a sculptor. Or a sculptor. I've always done 2-dimensional work. So I just pulled out, this is one that is made actually out of polymer clay, and it's not totally finished. It would be glued onto a panel like this, but you can kind of see the back and for audio listeners, I'm holding up a image of it's my hand with my daughter's hand on top of it, but made out of polymer clay. And so each color, like here, I've sort of rolled out colors into this gradient to create the illusion of depth in our fingers. And this is an older one. This also has some glitter embedded in it. So I like using those materials that I find in my classroom, using materials that talk to motherhood and childhood and these experiences, while I'm also using imagery that speaks to those experiences.
Yeah, and those hands look very lifelike. And I like the touch of the nail polish as well on the fingers.
Yeah. Anytime I mean, my hands are usually pretty messy art hands, but anytime I do my nails, my daughter has to get hers done the same.
Well,
or she'll dictate what color I get.
oh yeah, I know, I can see that. Talk to me a little bit about just the life of a working artist and a teacher. Before we talk kind of about a schedule, because I know you make a lot of art and you sell art, but just talk to me a little bit about just the certification process, because a lot of art teachers might not be regularly state certified, and you're kind of using that, just kind of having worked for an organization, how that is.
Yeah, so I am not certified, which is why I work for a nonprofit that sends artists into schools. So my degrees are in art, not in education. My whole family's teachers, so I feel like I kind of grew up with teaching, like it's in my bones. And I talked about working administratively. I feel like I pushed against it. I tried to like not teach,
Yeah.
and realized I couldn't not teach. But I never went to school for education. So I'm not certified. I'm a teaching artist. And that just means I work for a nonprofit and they send me into schools. There's lots of teaching artists all over the country, but especially in New York and Los Angeles, both have lots of teaching artists and several organizations working this way. And one big difference between being a certified art teacher and being a teaching artist is that because I'm not certified, the classroom teacher has to be in the classroom with me. So sometimes I feel a little guilty that I don't give them sort of a prep. They don't get to leave. Often they can stay and kind of do grading or do whatever work they need to do, but they by law have to still be there. And part of the goal of having them there for the organization I work for is that they're also getting, like, I don't want to call it completely professional development, but they're getting a little bit of art knowledge, because they're responsible for art instruction when I'm in those 20 weeks that I'm not there. So I get 10 weeks on, and then there's 20 more weeks where they are doing art. So part of my role is to teach the students, but to also help give that art knowledge to the teachers.
Yeah, so that benefits them as well.
Yeah.
So because you're in schools, or you're starting soon, and you'll be in schools most of the week during the school day, how do you manage to work on your projects and also present at art shows and try to sell your work?
It's a lot. Yeah. So my schedule is I am on Tuesday through Friday. So I'm at one school Tuesday, Wednesday, and another school Thursday, Friday. So I have Mondays off. And right now, Mondays, my daughter has a short day. So I have maybe like 4 hours with no kids and no teaching responsibilities, where I can really try to get a lot of work done, focused work. And then the other time is just in the evenings after her bedtime. A lot of those times are my sort of studio hours. So I'll come out here. I'm in my sort of garage studio. So I'll come out after she goes to sleep and work for a few hours on artwork. And then often it's also just little bits and pieces in between. So I'll take, if I have wooden panels like this that I need to prepare, I can take a stack of them with me to the park. And while she's running around playing, I'm sanding them, I'm gessoing them, or like painting them white, just preparing panels like that.
Multitasking mom attitude.
Yep, gotta do it. Yeah. And I feel like I talk up this app all the time, but I love Google Keep, which, I mean, it's just part of the Google suite, but it's an app that lets you create like checklists. So I can do like to-do lists, or even I have lists of hashtags for promoting my artwork. I have, you can also just take notes. So I have sort of notes. You can do little drawings in there or add photos, and it syncs between my phone and my computer. So if I'm out and about and like an idea for titles or an idea for some new artwork comes to mind, I can jot it down in my phone and then come back to it later. So that always is really helpful, just to have kind of free up a little bit of brain space by putting it somewhere that's not just in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also trying to promote and sell your art. Are you at art shows very often throughout the year? And how does that work? Maybe with your daughter, do you take her? Or...
Yeah, I haven't done the art fairs like a lot of artists do. It's something I've thought about, and it's a lot. Like I've talked to other artists about it, and it's a lot of work. Maybe in the future, it's something that I'll do. I do have exhibits in galleries, so that's more like I apply, and then if I get in, I send off my artwork, and the galleries do a lot of the promotion, which is really helpful. And then the gallery that I've been working with, so I'm represented this year by Stay Home Gallery, and their representation model is a little different from most galleries. It's almost more like mentorship. They've been just incredible in talking us through sort of pricing and how to package your work, all those sort of nuts and bolts that you don't get in school. Like I went to art school and never learned any of that, never learned anything about business. So working with galleries and then with other artists to help learn that stuff and promote my work that way has been really helpful.
Yeah. So that's great that you're kind of getting that professional development through that gallery. So,
yes.
And that's, I'm sure a lot different, looks, somewhat like at least different than when you were going to art school, right? Roughly 20 years ago. So just how do you, you have pen interest, right? So that wasn't around then. So
yeah. Oh.
Well, talk to me about your all the things that
it.
you can do just to promote what you're doing. So you have a podcast called Teaching Artists, and tell me about who do you talk to for that podcast, and what are you going to do kind of in the future? What are your ideas for that?
Yeah, so I started it really kind of to feel less alone in just what we were talking about, juggling these two careers that don't always go hand in hand, but I feel like really do for me, being an artist and being an art teacher, being an art educator. So I interview other people that are doing both of those things that are, and it ranges. Some are really like high level artists who also teach a little bit, or sometimes it's almost the other way around, like full-time art teachers who are just trying to carve out that bit of time for their own art making. And then everything in between. And that's been really just personally super helpful to get to talk to others that are kind of in the same boat, or are more experienced in one place than I am. So I get tons of helpful advice and hopefully share tons of helpful advice for others in this community of artists who teach. And I guess that's where I'm going with it, that I want it to be a place where I can sort of lift up people who are doing both, who are trying to be a professional artist, but also still really passionate about teaching young people. And the goal is to, provide both opportunities for other artists in the form of sharing their work, helping with that promotion, exhibits, even just community groups. So I've been doing a monthly Art Educators Lounge with a collaborator, Victoria Fry, who runs another organization. Like she's also an art teacher, but runs a Visionary Art Collective for artists. So we have teamed up to host these monthly meetings where we alternate between workshops that could be helpful for other artists and educators, and just community, like coming together and sharing our work, sharing our challenges, sharing successes. So that's something that we're definitely continuing and thinking about ways to kind of grow that community.
And I'll put the link to that YouTube channel with the podcast in the show notes. Awesome. And talk to me a little bit about, there is a specific type of way of teaching art, just kind of in the behavioral lens. And having worked a lot with discipline and student behavior, I had not heard about this. So it's called Teaching for Artistic Behavior, TAB. It's a student-centered choice based way of teaching art. And you have a book as well that you're using for your upcoming lesson plans.
Yes, so I'll hold up the book for people watching. This is Studio Thinking from the Start. And there's several books. Another one is, I think, called Engaging Learners Through Art Making. But this one I've loved because it's super practical. There's, you can see all my little bookmarks. There's just lots of information from fellow art educators in the book that are sharing how they have used this pedagogy. And it's really based on what they call a 3-sentence curricula or 3-sentence pedagogy, which is the student is the artist, the classroom is their studio. What do artists do? So you kind of pose that question. What does an artist do? If you're an artist and this is your space to create, what next? And, it's not just left open there. It's the way that I've structured it, because I have super limited time with my students, is to have what I call a boot camp. So my first kind of half of teaching, my first 5 weeks, I go pretty quickly through the range of materials that I have available for students. So we'll do like a drawing day, a painting day, collage, sculpture. We kind of go through, and each day we're learning about that material and how to use it, but we're also starting to like add to our artist toolkit. So learning some techniques as much as I can fit into that one day, but also starting to talk about, well, sorry, I've got a siren here. Starting to talk about where do ideas come from. Hopefully that's not too distracting.
Okay.
Where do ideas come from? Starting to talk about what do you do if you have an idea? Like, where do you start? Do artists research? Do they dive in and experiment with materials? What do they do once they've kind of figured out what they want to make? How do they start creating? So we really talk through all of those things as a class. And the goal is, I guess, that I'm not dictating what they're making or how they're making it. It's more that I'm facilitating, I'm giving them the space and the materials, and then trying to help them build that toolkit. So they're learning techniques and how to work with materials, but also learning about other artists. So I bring in lots of contemporary art for them to look at and talk about. I try to share artists speaking. So because all of the artists that I share are still alive. So because of that, I can find videos usually and share like a short snippet of the actual artist talking about their work. So it's not me like telling them what this artist is doing. It's the artist maybe telling them, and then the students saying like, what do they see in the work? And I guess the end goal is that they are creating their own work. They kind of build up that toolkit for the first 5 weeks, and then they have 5 weeks of making something that's completely their own. So they go through the process of coming up with an idea, ideation, to research, experimentation, like testing, creating, revising, then maybe some curating. So maybe I made 3 things and I didn't love all of them. I just want to show this one. So really going through the whole process of being an artist.
Yeah, and it puts the responsibility into their hands even at the younger grades, and then they take more pride into that, and you're being that guide on the side, right? And
yeah,
I think that's important also. Like, you're showing the videos of those artists talking about, you're not just giving them a lecture on a certain type of art or an artist's background, but that you're using those YouTube videos and finding out what they can say from their own perspective. And I know a lot of kids, my daughter did at some point want to be an art teacher, and I don't know at 6th grade yet what she wants to be, but she was saying a couple of years ago, like, there are kids that take a lot of passion in art and just kind of the process. And I think learning that, like you said, going through those 5 weeks before they actually start the project, right? And then so they kind of understand more about the whole everything that's involved, right?
Right.
It's not just a one and done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's very different from the sort of like, I have an idea here, make my idea, like leading them through. I mean, I feel like there is a place for that sort of like guided drawings where you say, okay, draw a circle, now put another circle inside of it. We're going to end up making, I don't know, a sun or a flower or something. And everybody walks away with the same flower. There's room for that in art education, but I feel like it's so much more powerful and engaging for the students to be coming up with their own ideas and then following through with those ideas. And then my role becomes checking in individually with them and seeing, you had this idea to make this flower, like how are you doing it? What materials are you using? Are you getting stuck anywhere? And kind of problem solving with them.
Well, out of everything we talked about today on the podcast, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Ooh, I think with teaching for artistic behavior, that's something I'm really passionate about. This method of teaching is that it's empowering the students, but it's also, it's completely win-win because they're empowered and they're engaged. They're loving what they're doing. They become your advocate. They become I have zero behavior problems when I shifted to that method. Students are excited and they want to be there. They talk to their parents more about what it is that they're doing. It's just a completely win-win. And I feel like that can translate to other subjects, that when you give them more power, more choice, when you really center your lesson planning and your curricula around the student, and that also comes with more responsibility. It's just win-win all around.
Well, great. It's been so nice having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast and just hearing more about your background in art and, becoming a teaching artist and, how your career has kind of taken all types of turns and, led you to where you are now. Where can people follow you online and connect with you?
Yeah, so they can follow, I have pretty much two of everything for my podcast is Teaching Artist Podcast. And you can find that on Instagram is the main social media that I'm using. So at Teaching Artist Podcast, and then also teachingartistpodcast.com. And then my own artwork is on Instagram at Potts Art. So my last name, Potts Art. And my website is RebeccaPotts.com.
Great. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you so much as well. This was wonderful.